Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to By the Horns, a Bitcoin podcast about South Africa. And tonight we're joined by Carel van Wyk, a Bitcoin OG who was involved in the initial founding team of Luno, back before it was called Luno. He's been in the scene for literally longer than anyone. Carel, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ricki. Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
It's my pleasure, man. Glad to have you. Carel, Bitcoin is 12 years old? You've been involved in Bitcoin since the very early days. And when I first got on what was then Bitvice back in 2015, that was the only platform in South Africa. And now here we are, 7 years later. Bitvice has been around since 2014, right?
Yeah, Bitvice has been around earlier than that. I think it was launched in March 2013 by Timothy.
Damn.
That was a separate project. I wasn't involved with the initial Bitvice project. It was acquired by a project that I was involved with called Switchless. That's where I became involved.
Okay, so Bitvice has been around for 8 years now, or Luno, the previous iterations, 8 years, and the market has changed dramatically. From doing a couple of Bitcoin in volume a day to a couple of thousand Bitcoin volume a day. Yeah, you've seen the evolution of Bitcoin in South Africa, like from its infancy. Must have been pretty cool to see it all unfold.
I can tell you, I've seen some pretty crazy things. If we can talk about any of those things, but it's going to become a long podcast.
Well, we got time. But maybe before we get into that, let's jump into what your background is, just so people know a bit more about you, and then I'd love to hear your stories.
The quickest, shortest way I can introduce myself is at the age of 12, I discovered the QBasic interpreter on my Windows 3.1 386, and I realized that it's more fun to make games than to play games. So I've been coding ever since, and at some point I had a gaming startup that didn't work out that well. Still love playing games, but these days mostly interested in building Bitcoin infrastructure. Okay,
so are there any specific projects you're working on at the moment that you'd like to talk about? Is everything you still keeping it under wraps?
There's one I can mention. It's not yet publicly available. It's a proof of concept that I'm sort of still trying out with a couple of people, and it's called Crypto Convert. So there's a dual meaning there. It's either converting crypto into products and services, or somebody that's converted their life to crypto, as in a crypto convert. And the specific service that I'm working on is, Bitcoin comes from energy, essentially. We use proof of work to mine Bitcoin, uses electricity. So what this does is it lets you convert Bitcoin back into electricity.
So you're saying you could basically pay for electricity for your prepaid meter using Bitcoin?
Exactly. So my interest in the Bitcoin space from the start has been as an alternate payment system, and there's been some ups and downs in that journey. But with Lightning starting to become a thing, I feel like we're at a point where we can start actually using Bitcoin as something for everyday payments. So with the technology maturing, it feels to me like a good time to play around with this stuff as commercial services.
Absolutely. And have you got an MVP out in the market that you're beta testing with, or is it still very much in early dev?
Yeah, no, like I said, it's private, so there's no public thing yet. But if somebody watches this podcast a couple of weeks from now, they can start playing with it. I'll announce it on Twitter.
Amazing. I'm going to be number one to sign up. Sounds great. Although spending my sats on Eskom is a bit of sucks a bit, but it's a very great use case to test it with,
Yeah, I think we can talk about spending sats a little bit later on as well, and why. Yeah.
We'll get into that. But so your history, so you got into Bitcoin, you said in around 2011. You told me earlier before we got on the show. What was your origin story into Bitcoin? Like, how did you find it? What was your story surrounding getting involved?
So I was fortunate enough to be a postgraduate student in 2010. And the privilege of a postgraduate student is that they've got a lot of time to spend on Reddit. So people on Reddit were talking about this thing called Bitcoin, which seemed really interesting to me because I've had problems with trying to publish games and trying to get revenue streams. Is actually not that easy. Maybe these days it's easier, but when Bitcoin came on the scene, I was like, well, here's a essentially peer-to-peer payment system with a lot of potential. It looks interesting to me. And so I was in a lab called the MIH Media Lab, which was sponsored by Naspers. I might burn a few bridges here with this story, but as part of that, we had some close connections to the head of Naspers Internet Africa, so head of a very large division. And I emailed him and said, listen, there's this thing called Bitcoin. You need to look at it. It's going to change the world. And he responded by saying, okay, well, he's got a team of analysts that will look at it. And they actually requisitioned a study. They wrote a report, came back to me, and the report conclusion was, yes, the blockchain looks interesting, but we don't think Bitcoin is going to change the world. Rather look at tap to pay. That's the future of payments. And I was like, they're completely missing the point, clearly. So a couple of years later, I had the opportunity as part of a separate project with Standard Bank called SnapScan. So you'll definitely know of SnapScan.
Yep.
It's just a dev on that team, and the head of innovation of Standard Bank, we had a conversation at some point about Bitcoin, and he mentioned that his son is very much into it. He'd be keen to do a little pilot project. So I wrote a proposal for the project, submitted it, and actually got a positive response. And we had the opportunity to build probably one of the first fully integrated banking products in the world at that stage for Standard Bank. And this is with the company called Switchless. So we set up a team that was thanks to the SnapScan guys. They helped set up a team. I can't take much credit for that, but the team got pulled together. It was me and Timothy was the lead engineer, and Marcus, who you'll know from Luno, and Peter also from Luno. And so we built this thing called Standard Bank Bitcoin. Literally lived on bitcoin.standardbank.co.za. And if you Google around a bit, you can find one or two articles. So you'll see that this thing was unveiled in 2014 at Finovate, UK. And the first article on the 13th of February says Standard Bank in Bitcoin trading pilot. And then on the very same day, you'll see an article that says Bitcoin a no-go for Standard Bank. So what happened, unveiling of the project, the Standard Bank head of compliance actually saw the presentation. He was like, shut this down immediately. So
classic compliance bro move.
Yeah, I can understand why they did that. This is 2013, 2014. Probably even today, it's quite a risky thing for a bank to get involved with. But so we realized, a B2B play is not going to work out in our favor. Probably the banks are not going to launch anything like this soon. And so we pivoted to B2C. And like I said, Timothy was part of the Switchless founding team, and he actually founded BitX with another guy. So we had this thing running in the background, but the way it worked was you could click a button that says I want to buy Bitcoin, and then Timothy gets an email, and then there's another button that says I want to sell Bitcoin, and then if he gets 2 emails, you'll link those people up and do a little escrow swap. So we said, well, maybe we can make Timothy this a bit smarter.
Timothy was the matching engine.
He was literally the matching engine, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. He's really one of the best engineers I've ever worked with, and I've always admired that he had the guts to pull something like that off. But yeah, Timothy was literally the matching engine. Then he built one to take the job over from him. And from that, the Bitix that you probably know evolved, and eventually it was rebranded to Luno.
Yeah, I remember that, man. I remember being probably, I mean, but the Bitix days, I mean, the volume wasn't that high, but it was there and it worked. It was a good, seamless user experience. There was some volume on it, and then the rebrand to Luno happened, and obviously then the Naspers investment came, and you guys, Luno took off at a big
ironic,
way. Yeah.
Ironic that Naspers invested after that.
Yep. Did you ever? I told you so moment at all. Did you ever get to speak to the head of innovation again?
Nah, Naspers, it's such a vast entity that it's totally different people that was involved in the investment.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if that word ever got out to his boss that he started a whole team to look at it, and they were like, no, tap to pay is the future. Don't get me wrong, tap to pay is pretty cool, but I mean, it's not Bitcoin.
It's cool. Yeah, it's a cool technology, but it's a totally different league of problem.
Yeah. And so tell me, over this time, you've seen Bitcoin evolve, from the early days in 2011, where you literally, the wallet, what we know as wallets today, where the user interface was nothing like that back in the day. The user journey has changed. It's much easier to use. How have you seen Bitcoin evolve, and what's been the biggest thing to you, the biggest standout for you?
The biggest standout for me is actually it's relatively negative. There's a moment of realization that the way the world saw Bitcoin wasn't at all the way that I saw it. So, like I said earlier, I saw it as a new payment technology, but it became apparent very quickly that people just saw it as a way to get rich, buy it and speculate and trade. Probably 99.9% of people these days, they don't really care much about the technology at all. They just care about whether the price is going to go up, right? So that was probably the biggest thing that changed for me early on. On a technical level, I think what we've seen is and we can also talk about this maybe a little bit later, but we've seen significant advancements in the technology itself. I mean, in the early days, I think there was even times of downtime or chain reorgs in the very early days. And then we've seen issues like transaction malleability that probably killed Mt. Gox, some of the early large international exchanges. And now we're at a point in time, I think, where the technology is starting to really mature to a point where it can become a day-to-day thing. What I said from the start is that the day that Bitcoin becomes boring, I feel like I've done my job.
Yep. And I mean, so you obviously were party to the whole 2017 the block wars, which was really the Bitcoin as a payment solution versus Bitcoin as not a store of value, but small blocks versus big blocks, right? They wanted one wanted to scale on chain, one wanted to scale in layers. Where did you fall in that debate back in 2017, and has your view changed now?
So, I mean, from early on, it was apparent that Bitcoin had some problems, right? So the scaling issues is one of the most obvious ones, along with volatility. If you speculate, volatility is great. If you want to make payments, volatility is not so good. But the scaling debate, as you're touching on now, is one of the big things that's not quite solved yet. We're working on different solutions. And interestingly, I mean, you can say what you want about the BSV guys, but if you go read Satoshi's early forum posts, the way he saw the future was that we'll probably scale blocks much bigger. And as part of that, we probably will have super nodes run by large entities. And then you'd have normal people that need to connect to the blockchain via those super nodes. And I mean, I guess that's the BSV argument, but
Yeah.
Satoshi wasn't some prophet, right?
Yeah.
He couldn't have foreseen the future that was going to come from Bitcoin, and so the scaling debate. If you're a network engineer, I think there's very few network engineers that would agree it's a good idea to scale the block itself.
Yeah.
And the way I like to think about it is, I don't know if you're old enough to have played, to have these LANs where everybody carries their big CRT
Yes.
monitors and put it on a
Yeah.
desk. And then you connect these computers together with a thing called a hub, right?
Yeah. You play
And
Quake.
you play Quake. And the hub was pretty stupid. The hub just, whatever you send to the hub, it replicates and sends it out to everyone else on the network. So you're playing Quake, and then two of your buddies decide they're going to start sharing some music videos with each other. And as they start copying the network saturates and Quake starts to lag and you can't really play the game. So the Bitcoin network itself, all transactions are public and get transmitted to all nodes, right? So it acts like a hub, and it very easily gets saturated. That's why we see fee spikes and delays in transactions. So then one of your friends probably had rich parents and he bought a switch. And what is the difference between a switch and a hub? Well, a switch could route packets in a clever way so that only the recipient would receive the packets. So you could play Quake while your buddies are copying music videos while somebody else playing StarCraft, right? And so I think the scaling debate, there's something to be said for, well, we can just increase the size of the hub. We can give it more CPU and RAM. But I don't think that's a smart way to scale. It's probably smarter if we can route transactions smartly, so that only the people that really need to know about that transaction gets to know about it.
Yeah.
And that's where Lightning comes in, obviously.
Yeah. So 2015 Lightning white paper drops. There's quite a fuss about it, and here we are 6 years later, and we have almost 3,000 BTC in the Lightning network in channel capacity, and it's working.
It's working.
Yeah, what's your view on the Lightning network?
Well, again, as a software developer, as an engineer, if you look at the technology behind it, which is hash time lock contracts or HTLCs, it's super interesting. If you're into crypto engineering and you haven't read up on that, definitely recommend it. It's really a fantastic innovation. There's some concerns in the kind of structure that comes from the setting up of channels, and that's where you might have again this notion of nodes that become quite big, maybe super hubs that eventually might become targets of either attacks or regulation or whatever. So that's definitely a concern if we say that we want to optimize for decentralization. But whether it's practically going to be a problem going to the future, that still remains to be seen. I mean, anybody can run a Lightning node right now on their little Raspberry Pi in their home. So at the moment, it looks like we're still in a good place where we can say that there's a high degree of decentralization. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a potential solution. It's a potentially a very good solution.
Yeah. And what's your take on other layer 2 technologies like Liquid, for example?
Okay, I'm not familiar with Liquid, but if we talk about things like Nano, that just if you want to talk about other technologies, there's this really cool video on YouTube that's it's about the blind watchmaker.
Yeah.
And so it tries to visually represent the process of evolution.
It's based on Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker.
Exactly. Yes. And what's really cool about that is you can see how there's generations of watches that sort of evolve, and each generation being more fit as a watch. So there's this concept of a what do they call it, a fitness function or something like that.
Natural selection. I'm actually a formally trained evolutionary biologist by training at Stellenbosch. So this is my wheelhouse, right? Like, it's about natural selection and evolution and how genes selection operates at the gene level, right?
Exactly. And so we've got this, what I feel is a Cambrian explosion of technology right now. So I'm open to the idea of other technologies maybe succeeding at the goal of a peer-to-peer money system. But I do believe that many, if not probably most, projects today don't optimize for the right fitness function. I think people try to be very clever about it instead of being maybe you should be a little bit more dumber about things. But I mean, again, that remains to be seen. And a cool thing from that video, if you watch it, is you can see these on a timeline. You can see these generations of, I guess, watch species dominating, and then they almost completely die out, and another generation comes out, and the next generation dominates until this process repeats. So there's some very interesting technology out there. Unfortunately, I haven't seen something that looks to me like it could take the king of the hill.
You see, what I find interesting about Liquid is that so Liquid competes with Lightning. Not quite, but like it's a second layer built on top of Bitcoin. But both of them are built on top of Bitcoin, right? Which is leveraging the security of the Bitcoin network. And that's what all the other altcoins don't have. It's because they're not building on top of Bitcoin. So, I mean, watches are built on top of the concept of time. And they use that same protocol, which is how we 60 seconds in a minute. And there's a set of protocol rules we optimize this the rules of the game, you know? And other altcoins are coming in with totally different suite of rules, and they've optimized for different things. And maybe they're not measuring time in the same way. So this is, I suppose, why you've got these protocol wars taking place. And why, in my mind, that war has been won already. Bitcoin has got 98% of the hash power. It's got all the security. It's got all the energy behind it. And now it's a case of these layer twos competing with each other. So I think a lot of people in the space think that Lightning is a done deal. They're like, yeah, it works, cool. You know, people are on Lightning, and it does work. It's great, but it by no means doesn't mean that it's not going to have its own issues, and it might be unseated as the layer two scaling solution by something like Liquid, for example. And I'm not advocating for Liquid over Lightning. It's an interesting comparison between the two. But while we're on that topic, so now we've kind of gone down theoretically the altcoin route here. So your arguments that you're making here is that altcoins are a good breeding ground for new innovation, if I understand you correctly. It might be that they are developing some cool stuff. Would you think it's fair to say that we might or hope to see some of that innovation happening on top of Bitcoin? Is that something you'd like to see, or would you? What's your take on it?
It's a tricky thing. If you innovate, you need to move fast, right? And the problem with Bitcoin is it's built so much momentum now that it's difficult to really innovate on the core of the protocol. So like you say, it's probably the innovation is going to be on the second layer. And by the way, thanks for mentioning Liquid. I'll go look into the technology now. I'd like to make a last comment on Lightning. What's interesting to me is that the Bitcoin developers, if you kind of get a sense of their general nature, they seem to be extremely serious. Whereas the Lightning developer community, if you go look at the code they're writing and the way they communicate, it's actually quite a bit more fun and So I'll definitely go check out Liquid. And like you said, it's probably not a done deal. Maybe that Lightning's going to be the best thing, but probably a second layer solution, in my opinion, is probably the scaling thing. Okay, I'm totally getting distracted. So altcoins. If there's interesting technology that comes out of it, the question is, can it be applied to Bitcoin? And somebody once said that working on Bitcoin core is like working on Boeing 747 that's currently flying. So I think the kind of innovations that we see, like Schnorr signatures and even Segwit a couple of years ago, it's going to be things that's had a lot of thought and time and energy behind it, whereas altcoins can be a lot more nimble. So that's why it's probably better to innovate in a non-Bitcoin token.
Yeah, and then port that code across on another layer. Even might even be that like some altcoin dies and loses traction, but some of the cool innovations that we're trying to do, we can learn from that. Like that's what science is about, right? Ultimately, this is science in the digital realm. There are all a bunch of, we've had 9,000 different science experiments. Although I say that we've had 8,500 different scam experiments and about 500 interesting science experiments. And
that's an unfortunate flip side.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, like, what's your thoughts on the scamminess of the altcoin market?
I mean, it's enabled by something, right? And what it's enabled by is probably that same thing that disillusioned me early on, which is it's just plain greed. And greedy people are gonna fall for scams. That's just how it works. And the problem is, even if you tell somebody that it's a scam, they've got a vested interest to believe that it's not, and in fact to sign up other people.
Yeah,
it's incredibly unfortunate. Luckily, in my family, I've told people don't fall for these things, and they actually listen to me when I tell them something is a scam. So in my case, I was able to convince the people close to me not to fall for these things. But in the broader public, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, and especially within the South African context, right? Like, I don't know why South Africans love a scam. They love falling for a scam. It would seem. Yes, they love it. Like MTI and AfriCrypt. AfriCrypt, I smell a rat there. I don't think that was a legitimate scam. I think that was like a money laundering thing from the get-go, because I never heard of AfriCrypt until they went bust. Whereas MTI...
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And normally these things last for like 2 years, right?
Yeah. Like you said, a scam typically the scheme is well known because it relies on a lot of people getting involved. So their marketing is probably the most important business division, whereas Africa came out of left field.
Yeah, and it was over. I mean, they had allegedly a 6-month life cycle. I don't know how they got that amount of money in 6 months. I smell a rat there. Just sounds to me like they were laundering money and then got caught out.
For sure.
Yeah, there's definitely more to the story. But like MTI, for example, how many people we told don't touch MTI, and like you say, like they have a vested interest to not believe you, so they get angry with you. They're like, no, but my mate got me into this. He would never lie to me. I'm like, bro, your mate doesn't know shit. Like, he doesn't know about this stuff. We've seen these scams over and over. It's like it's the same exact formula every time, but people fall for it.
And one of the early ones was Triple M, right? It is actually, I think, a Russian scammer. He ran this thing it's a pyramid scheme called Triple M, and he was jailed for it. But this is before crypto, and then he discovered Bitcoin. He was like, perfect opportunity to relaunch and rebrand Triple M.
Yeah.
And what made me very sad was I used to sell Bitcoin for cash in Cape Town, which you can say it was a risky thing, but I wanted to meet the people who were interested in Bitcoin. And unfortunately, what I found was that the people who met me to buy Bitcoin, they were lower LSM, looked like people who couldn't afford to lose the money. And the amounts that they purchased, at that point, Triple M had this fixed amount of Bitcoin that you had to start your investment.
It's like packets they always sell. Yeah, it's always like in a bundle.
Yeah, it was something like 500 rand, something stupid. But and these people were buying 500 rand worth of Bitcoin at a time. And I realized what's happening is that in their network, somehow this Triple M thing has been spreading, and they've been getting scammed. And it's people who can't afford to lose the money.
And the irony is that those people, if they were just buying $500 off you at a time, if they'd have just hung onto it, now their lives would be changed completely. That 500 rands with the Bitcoin would be enough to set them for life. If we're talking 2013, 2014 days, you know?
Yeah, I don't know if it set them for life, but they'd have
a lot more than that.
Yeah, a lot more.
Enough to have a tax problem.
Yes.
Yeah, but now, I mean, the scams don't go away. Like they just change. And one of our previous guests, Louis Nell, he's actually been working hard on calling out the scammers and documenting it. And they've got a couple of court cases ongoing. And what he told me, which was really pretty disturbing, was it's the same scammers running these things over and over again. It's repeat offenders, and they're like a scam implodes, and somehow they don't get busted. I mean, maybe that's because the police are useless, but they just roll into it. So like the guys from Bitcoin Global, they rolled into, it was the same team that rolled into MTI, and no doubt they'll be back to do another one in short order. It's like it's their modus operandi.
It's probably not because the police are useless, and I guess we're going to roll into the big R topic now. It's probably because their hands are tied.
Yeah,
there's not enough rules to enforce these kind of things. The MTI thing, it was a scam. So obviously from the start, those people should have gone to jail pretty much straight away.
Yeah,
but there was no rules to enforce that would get upheld in a court to put them away.
Yeah. I mean, the regulation thing, like it cuts both ways, right? Like, so yes, it protects people from this kind of nefarious activity. That something like MTI can't, ever come to be. Although it probably will still. It'll just stick to the black market.
It would still be. Yes,
but it would like smaller scale. Yeah. But it'll be there. Exactly. It's not going away. Yeah. I mean,
like I said, the marketing efforts. The marketing is the most important aspect, and so if you can at least kill public marketing, you already make a big dent in the operation.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that's been limited by the likes of Facebook and Google not allowing cryptocurrency adverts, probably for this exact purpose, especially in 2017. It was wild with the ICOs. It was looking back at it, it was absolutely insane, the amount of ICOs coming out, and like Facebook was just like, no guys, there's no more ads. We're going to turn down the sweet ad revenue money because we're not going to be liable for all these scams. But now it puts us in a position where with Bitvice, we have to go with like guerrilla marketing campaigns with podcasts, etc., because we can't advertise in normal channels because of the fucking scammers. It ruined everything for us. So it kind of cuts both ways, but it is what it is. The podcasting venue or channel is pretty good for us anyway, because that's where you find the most, intelligent people, or people who listen to podcasts, in my opinion. So it's not too bad for us. But let's segue quickly a bit more into South Africa. Like, what's your, I mean, maybe politics or the reality of life in South Africa aside, what role do you think Bitcoin has got to play in South Africa over the next decade?
Yeah, okay, over the next decade, 10 years, it feels like it's maybe not a lot of time. There's a lot of people who say, well, crypto is going to serve all the unserved people, and it's going to bank the unbanked. And I've never felt like that's a good way of looking at it. Instead, probably it will benefit those people who want to be unbanked more. Those that want to get out of the banking system, and they tend to be people who have money in the bank. They want to get out of it. So I'm not sure. I'm not one of those people who say, it's going to, solve poverty in Africa. At the same time, I've got a friend who's from Malawi, and I realized one day he's sending money back home, and he's using a service that literally charges him 10%. Of the funds he's sending. And so I said, I mean, this is a classic story, but we did the experiment. We ran a full loop, and using local Bitcoins, he was making a profit of 25%. So that's a 35% difference. He's making a profit sending money back home. Now, whether that's legal or not, it's probably not. I mean, if the Reserve Bank is listening, we were just sending small amounts and testing it. you're welcome to come talk to me about it. But and that's project, that experiment we've stopped. But the reality is you could use Bitcoin today and help these people save a hell of a lot of money that's remitting money to other African countries. I think remittances to South Africa, probably the arbitrage gap is low enough that it's not going to make much of a difference. We still have a lot of, I mean, if you look at the news, every second week there's some cash in transit heist or an ATM that got blown up. And so that I think there is a case to be made that if access to internet and smart mobile devices became ubiquitous, which probably the adoption is always going to increase, there is a case to be made that crypto could replace some of those problems with cash in maybe in the next 20 years. I don't know if 10 years is maybe a bit optimistic, but I'm sure there's opportunity.
So you don't see cash being removed in African society anytime in the near future?
If African society completely digitizes and everybody becomes an online citizen, then maybe. I don't think that's going to happen very soon.
So we would need widespread economic growth at a tremendous rate for that to happen, right?
Well, we would need economic growth, but the cost of connectivity and the cost of mobile devices keep going down. So there's probably, even if we do nothing, there's probably going to be a point where most people are going to be online but I don't know if it's going to be 10 years. Might be a bit longer than that.
Interesting. Yeah. No, it's a very like I don't want to say sober way of thinking about it, but I mean, it's in Bitcoin, we often get caught up in hype, about like, we just think like to the moon, like it's going to change everything. And I mean, it has changed a lot in its lifetime. In 12 years, look at what Bitcoin's changed. You've got presidents talking about it. You've got nation states that have adopted it, but simultaneously, like, how does Bitcoin solve some problems? I mean, the remittance one is good, but for the poorest of the poor, like you can't accept volatility, not just in your savings, but in your medium of exchange. So, and only when adoption is widespread, you get rid of the volatility. So the poorest of the poor in Africa and Asia that are going to be adopting Bitcoin eventually will only get at the end of the adoption curve where the volatility is gone, but then there's no real upside appreciation to be had for them anymore. So it's not going to drag them out of poverty, but what it will do is enable, decrease the barriers to entry for, transacting and, the whole peer-to-peer story, which is interesting because, like you say, it's the remittance companies are charging 10%, but it's the banks are charging them a fortune as well because they all operate with cash. So you've got to go withdraw your money, you've got to deposit your cash to get back into the banking system, and there's high fees associated with those. So it's interesting.
There's fees and there's all kinds of limits, and there's even you get reported if you send more than a specific amount of cash.
Yeah. And it's your time. You got to go stand in a queue every Saturday or on payday to go and withdraw your money in a 200-meter long queue from Capitec.
Yeah, nobody's got time for that.
Yeah, well, apparently a lot of people do, unfortunately, but it sucks. And I mean, next minute you're standing in a queue and then the police are spraying you with a water cannon, like they did in Belleville last year. Nobody wants that, but it's the reality of it.
Yeah. So, but you're talking about solving societal problems now, but if we can maybe look at more anecdotal cases, there's been a lot of situations that I've been in, maybe wearing a Luno t-shirt or talking to somebody about just chatting to a random car guard where they mention that they invest in Bitcoin. And so I'm certain that there's going to be a number of people who previously, maybe from a disadvantaged background, had nothing, that's going to make some serious and significant life-changing gains, like you said earlier, that will change their lives. So that is happening today, but we can't say it's solving a societal problem.
Yeah. It's solving it. I mean, I suppose society's problems get solved at an individual level first. Like, you've got to be the change you want to see in the world first before you can change anything. And I think this top-down approach of social engineering can cause massive issues down the line, as we're seeing with society today. We've got so many decisions that are made centrally, and it just ups the risk. If those decisions are wrong and it's been applied to a large amount of people, the fallout is going to be severe. And take central banking as a prime example. They all follow the same doctrine of Keynesian economics. If that turns out to be wrong, which I believe it is, you end up with hyperinflation all around the world simultaneously, which is a bit of a problem. Luckily, we've got Bitcoin, but before we had Bitcoin, like, the situation is pretty dire. I mean, what did you do? You got gold, but that's kind of been co-opted by the central banks themselves. So it'll be interesting to see how small countries like El Salvador, individuals in those countries start adopting their own personal Bitcoin standard, and does that drive those countries to opt out of the dollar system, for example, like we've seen in El Salvador? Do we see Zimbabwe, for example, or Lesotho, for example, adopt Bitcoin at a higher rate? I think Nigeria is actually the leading in this. They've got like 30% Bitcoin use in their population.
Yeah, Nigeria is probably one of the more interesting cases to look at, especially because the central bank a couple of months ago, maybe half a year ago or more,
It's February, yeah.
They said crypto exchanges are no longer allowed to operate, or I think technically banks are not allowed to provide accounts to exchanges.
Yeah.
And yet, as we've seen, the trading volumes is probably at some points second largest country's trading volumes in the world. And that's not fake news. Those people are freaking crazy Bitcoin traders and other crypto traders. And they realize that they're in this position where their government money is worth less than the cryptocurrencies that they're trading. And those people are smart. Nigerians are freaking smart. And they're that's one country where there's a high adoption rate of internet and mobile smart devices.
I think that was a very good move on Luno's behalf, moving into Nigeria as a market after South Africa. I think very good strategic move. They got screwed over by the Reserve Bank recently now, and they had to play ball with the Reserve Bank, put them in a pretty cuck position, because all of those users just moved to Paxful and local Bitcoins in the peer-to-peer markets. And once you've gone that route, it's like taking the orange pill. Like, there's not much going back. Like, why would you run the risk of being on a centralized exchange again? If you're keeping small amounts.
Well, I can tell the Nigerians, when you mess with their money, they get very angry. They don't have a lot of patience, and so maybe some of them might like to rather use a central exchange where there's somebody that they can shout at if something goes wrong.
The problem with Luno is there's no one to shout at. There's no number to phone. There's no address. There's nothing. You're just shouting at a chatbot. That's not as fulfilling.
Yeah, I think you just need to go through the help system. You will get support. It's not as opaque as some people think. I think they just don't maybe put enough effort into trying to reach the Luno support.
Look, I don't want to give Luno too much shit. Like, they have paved the way in South Africa for, first off, from an exchange point of view, never been hacked. Security is great. The customer service, like you say, is good. So as far as exchanges in the world go, I think Luno is right up there with the best of them. So hats off to them for what they've done, and a great product. And what I really like about Luno is they focused on Bitcoin for a very long time and didn't go the altcoin route in 2017. They've introduced a few more now, but it means they can focus on getting the Bitcoin security right. And that if any exchange is going to be hacked, it's going to be those who have more altcoin exposure, because your dev resources are split in 1,000 different directions. So hats off to them for what they've done there. Really don't have too much bad to say about them. But once again, it is a centralized exchange. And if you're leaving your coins on an exchange, you're running a risk. Like Nigeria, prime example, they banned conversion Bitcoin to Naira and withdrawals to Naira. So
the coins are safe. It's just that they can't convert it into Naira anymore.
Yeah, and they could withdraw them into their own self-custody. Cool, and then go to a peer-to-peer exchange. So those guys just had to do an extra step. It's not as if they lost their funds, but they couldn't convert to Naira. So some of the functionality on the exchange was reduced and limited, which kind of sucks, especially if you're a trader, and especially if you're an ARB trader. And that happened while you were running an ARB. Not a good time. I'm sure the ARB gap or the ARB loop in Nigeria is probably pretty good for a long time. I don't know what the situation with capital controls is, but I can imagine it's there.
Yes, they have very strict capital controls, probably even stricter than South Africa.
Which means the ARB gap is nice and high.
Very nice and high, yes. But so maybe something I just need to mention now. If we talk about Luna, I'm not talking on Luna's behalf. My involvement with Luna ended in 2019. And it's not because of anything bad happening. It's just because I used to take the train into Cape Town and people burned down the trains. And I didn't want to commute. And I was like, okay, I want to spend more time with my family instead of being away from them for 12 hours a day.
And that was before remote working was cool.
I mean, that was literally 6 or 8 months before Luna went fully remote. So it was a bit ironic. But
so is Luna fully remote now? Kind of off topic, but have they given up their offices in town?
I'm saying fully remote in terms of COVID things. Like they can operate fully remotely, but their offices are still there.
Okay. Anyway, enough of Luna. We were chatting to some guys on our Bitcoin chat group that you're part of there, and there's a bit of a project that started up very small scale at the moment, but in one of the coastal towns up the East Coast, where they're trying to emulate a Bitcoin beach model. I mean, what are your thoughts on how you would approach introducing Bitcoin into a underprivileged community, and how would you go about that? Because you can look at it from like people are just trying to force their views on a community and how they think they should adopt it, and that's probably not going to work. I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's quite tricky because there's a lot of education that goes with it. So if they're prepared to take the time, spend it on educating people, the most basic thing is keeping your keys safe. If you're not using your own custodial wallet, and you're trusting somebody else, then just keeping your password safe. These are very difficult concepts for people that don't have a lot of technical history and background. It's not that they can't learn it. They definitely can. My Malawian friend I mentioned earlier, he had very little technical background, and he got up and running with everything. But it takes time to educate. And that would be the key, I suppose. And then maybe if they can combine that with some good PR and marketing and get a word out and maybe get an international response, there's some great things that can come from that.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I don't want to be prescriptive about how we do this, because Bitcoin means different things to different people. Like for one argument you could say is like in the lower income bracket, Lightning is going to be adopted more preferentially because of on-chain fees, etc. But simultaneously, like I think people especially people from underprivileged and poor backgrounds, for them the number go up technology is even more pertinent than it is to someone who's from a wealthy background, because if you have 100 Rand a month to save, you're never getting out of poverty with that. Inflation is going to chow you. You don't know any other assets. The only asset you have is you're saving in rands, and that's not in a stock portfolio or something. It's sitting in like a checking account or a savings account with fixed deposit with Capitec. And the interest you're earning is less than the inflation that you're experiencing. So you're actually going backwards. So Bitcoin really, in my mind, offers a great savings technology for those communities. So maybe advocating for spending Bitcoin via Lightning, etc., is not, a great solution there. But maybe it is. I mean, who knows? Like it might be able to replace the cash economy in those environments, because cash is very dangerous. Those corner plaza shops get knocked off all the time because they're carrying cash. But Lightning introduces another tool in that toolkit, which I find interesting, because you can now go to someone with 10 Rand cash and by literally give him 10 Rand, and he can send you some sats from his cell phone to yours. But there, you got some sats. So you're stacking sats already. Peer-to-peer, not through any exchange or any platform, which I think is powerful. I mean,
yeah. And I think, like, I don't want to plug Strike or anything, or Jack Mallers, I don't know how you pronounce his surname, but something that they do right is they package this in a consumer-friendly way, because most Bitcoin tech, most Lightning tech, it's not very consumer friendly at the moment. And that's why also at this point, I wouldn't push Lightning onto anyone. And especially in those communities where something like data is still a scarce commodity. I mean, you need to be connected. Lightning is an online transaction.
Yeah.
There's some ways around it, but practically it's better to be online. And even what you just mentioned, number go up technology, I also think that's a slightly dangerous aspect of it to push if you give it to people that don't understand the long-term view, because as you know, it's a super volatile asset. And so you don't want to destroy wealth as well. And that can happen easily if the price goes down and people cash out.
Yeah.
So with insufficient education, it's actually pretty dangerous.
Yeah. And like, that's where your point about education is the most important one. Like, people, if you want to go out there and be trying to help poor people and underprivileged people, like, the best thing to do is to help them educate so they can make their own informed decisions. Because we can't be prescriptive about what we think they should be doing with their money. Like, that makes us the same as the banker assholes. Like, that's not at all. I have no idea what is best for someone else. That's totally up to them. But if we can provide them with education so they can make their own informed decisions, like, that's life-changing, because maybe they grasp Bitcoin completely, and they're like, okay, cool. The best strategy I can do is take $5 a day and go and buy some sats from the Spaza store every day. Get my $5, I go and buy, and I do that for 10 years. And then my life has changed, and my kids don't have to grow up the same way I did. Like, it's, if the Bitcoin thesis plays out and we, number go up. If it doesn't, well, you lost $5 a day for a long period of time. But once again, like, you can make your own informed decisions. But if we just go in there and say, here's an app, do this, like, we know different from a pyramid scheme going in there and hooking them and stealing all of their sats. Not that we're going to rob them, but they're making uninformed decisions, which is what people in pyramid schemes do. So it's a tricky one, man. I've got a friend of mine who's busy working in this space at the moment, and he's just focusing on the educational aspect of it, because that's really the best thing you can do.
No, for sure. It is dangerous. It's still one of those, if people ask me, okay, when should I buy Bitcoin? And I always tell them two things. Firstly, don't put in more than you're willing to lose. And so if there's people who don't have money that they can afford to lose, it's kind of dangerous advising them to buy Bitcoin, right? Enabling them with technology, I think it's slightly different, but there's still also, anyway. The other thing I tell people is, if you do buy, then just, like you just said, buy a little bit frequently.
Yeah. The problem is when you tell someone to buy, they say, is it a good time to buy? You tell them. Then they're going to come back to you and be like, is it a good time to sell? And then
you're not allowed to tell them it's a good time to buy. That's financial advice. You can get into trouble.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, depends how you feel about rules. But anyway, the like, having people, then you have like 50 people coming to you because are now known in your family and circle of friends as the guy who's into Bitcoin. And they're all coming and be like, oh, should I buy? Oh, should I sell? And you're like, listen, guys, I'm not your Forex trading signals bot, like, go join a Telegram group if you want to be spammed with this kind of stuff. But the stacking sats route, like, that puts the onus on them. It puts the onus on them to go and do the research. So like, oh, okay, I'm putting $10 in a day, whatever I can afford. And that then allows them to slowly dip their toe, get in, and they go and do the work themselves, rather than someone who's just relying on you to be like, oh, should I buy now? Like, that's almost like not a waste of time, but you're not doing them any favors, really.
No, not yourself and not them. I've never made money trading. I've only ever lost money trading because I'm an emotional trader. So don't listen to me. And the one person that I have influenced is my dad, and he's lost several $1,000 because of me. So I don't.
Lesson learned.
I don't make predictions. Yeah.
So I traded as well, 2017. I used to work for a stockbroking firm, and I got into the TA thing, wrote a newsletter for them daily. Like, we had a bunch of professionals. So like, I was working with a bunch of people who knew what they were doing. and they were successful traders. And I managed to trade successfully in Rand terms. So my Rand value of my portfolio went up. But then I did my recon and my Bitcoin value was down. And I was like, this was stupid because I've spent all of this time. People don't understand. This is what they don't get about trading. It consumes your life, especially with Bitcoin, because it's 24/7. You can't switch off. You can't stop. It has you by the balls. And now you have to play this game and it's not worth it. Especially when you could have just left it and had more money. Literally, it's a fool's errand. And what most people don't realize when they get into trading is for some reason, they get into crypto and then they think they should trade. Now everyone's day trader. You're trading against professionals and you're trading against algorithms, and they will take the shirt off your back. They live for people like you because it's easy, fresh meat that they can just take your money from you. They spoof the system. They have bots that put in fake orders that then pull the orders out. They play that. They know exactly what they're doing, and you don't, and you're going to get wrecked. And anyone you try to recommend to get into trading is going to get wrecked as well. Maybe 1% of people don't get wrecked, and they take the 99% of people's money. So it's just, and people, you got to burn your fingers on the stove maybe to know. So maybe if you really don't believe me, go and trade yourself. You'll figure it out.
You'll figure it out very quickly. Yeah. You'll have some sleepless nights about it.
Yes, it's horrible. It's really horrible. Like now, price dips. I mean, we goes up. We posted on the groups before this call started. Like, it's now up $46,000. Like 2 weeks ago, it was like 30 grand. Now it's 46. No one's like freaking out about price because everyone in our Bitcoin like group we don't care about price really because we're all long-term hodlers. We're like, oh, cool, it's gone up, nice. And the same when it goes down, you're like, okay, cool, I'm going to buy some more. But if you're a trader, yes,
I don't care about the price at all. All I care about is what the technology is, what's going on there, and there's some really cool stuff going on behind the scenes. People don't even know about it, which excites me as a software person, as a technically minded person. There's some really cool things going on.
So what's the coolest project you're looking at the moment?
So maybe like I said, I care about payments specifically in the space. And so one of the main problems with Bitcoin payments, I mean, I don't know if you can remember, but you could buy stuff on Takealot and on Bid or Buy and on we even did a pick and pay pilot. And then,
I remember that.
And then when they saw the network fees, there was unfortunately a spike in network fees. It was about 250 Rand to buy a basket of 100 Rand. And they were like, it's not going to fly. So
and you're going to tell them, listen, guys, it could be a basket of 1 million Rand or 100 Rand. The fees are going to be the same.
They're like, what are the average basket sizes? But so the main problem with Bitcoin payments is refunds. If somebody uses a weird wallet and it sends too much or too little or too late, you need to refund them. That's a big headache. And so you're asking about cool technology. Something that's really cool to me is something that the L&D Lightning teams launched or released, which is called it was first called a HODL invoice. And now they're calling it a hold invoice. Maybe it's a little bit less obscure.
A bit more normie.
And it's maybe a bit more normie. But so what's cool about this hold invoice is that it's a 2-step process from the merchant side. So the merchant will first provide you with an invoice. You'll pay it, or you'll commit a payment to the invoice. But then the merchant can decide whether they will accept it or not. They can either cancel the payment after the amount's been committed, or they can accept it and settle it. And that's very interesting because if you now, and there can be a timeout of several hours. So now as a merchant, if something goes wrong, other things Lightning solves is you don't have a problem with incorrect amounts because the invoice specifies the amount. But let's say you try to, you check your stock and the stock just got sold out as the guy was paying. Then you just say, listen, there was a problem with your order. The stock the item's out of stock and your payment is returned to you. And that to me was like the missing step in peer-to-peer payments. So I'm very excited about that, and that's the proof of concept that I'm working on, is using this new technology.
That's very cool. So this makes it much easier for a vendor selling multiple products to, just operate on a Lightning standard, on a Bitcoin standard. Previously,
Much
the
easier,
headaches.
because you don't want to communicate with somebody, get a refund address, try to figure out whether they want a refund in rands or in Bitcoin because the price changed. So it just makes the whole process a lot more streamlined.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And anything else, any other projects you're looking at that you think are pretty cool?
There's one I'm working on at the moment, but I can't talk about it yet. But it's related to crypto donations. It's just a very easy way to...
Via Lightning or via Bitcoin?
At the moment, it's just layer 1, so it's just Bitcoin. If it works out well, then maybe Lightning can be incorporated.
Okay. One of the biggest things, you and I briefly spoke about this a while back, but one of the biggest things on Lightning that I find frustrating is you can't put up a static QR code for payments. So if I want to solicit donations on my YouTube, so for example, Bitvice sponsors Conscious Caracal's show, he wants to put up a QR code for donations. If he has to put, currently as it stands, if he uses Blue Wallet, he's got to put a new QR code up every show, essentially, because they say that code is valid for an hour. Only on the live stream can he get donations. It expires after an hour. So then if that video is archived and people watch it after the fact and they scan the code, it won't work anymore. So like having a static address like you have with Bitcoin would make your life much easier. And I know there are some options available, but it's not mainstream at all yet, as far as I understand.
Well, there are some you can play with that most wallets will probably support. There's Allen URL. I think you'll need the Allen URL backend for that, but you can then put a static QR code in your stream that should then resolve to a fresh invoice when somebody scans it. That's one thing. And then, the Lightning devs understand that this is a problem that people have. There's some tech that they've been working on that used to be called key send, and key send lets you send directly to a Lightning node. I don't know if it's appropriate in this case. Then if you can really generate a QR code with that's a key send QR code, but they are evolving that technology. It's now evolved to a thing called AMP, something multipath, and I'm sure they're still working on the problem. Hopefully it gets solved in the near future.
Yeah, and for normies, non-coders like myself, like I work in tech, but I'm not a dev, right? But like maybe people don't quite understand. Like it sounds so simple. Oh, you could do it on Bitcoin. Like why can't you do it on Lightning? That's because Lightning is a complicated beast. Like it is not a simple thing. Just the way the infrastructure works, the way the channels have to be balanced, and it's a story, man. It's a proper story.
Exactly. But it's also one of those things that will become more consumer friendly as time goes on. Like if you look at things like you mentioned Blue Wallet. So Blue Wallet is still custodial unless you run your own node. But there's some cool ones like Moon and Breeze.
Yeah.
And the wallet developers are also working on these exact problems that you're mentioning now. So we'll probably pretty soon start seeing some really nice consumer-friendly products out there.
Yeah, I think Breeze Wallet, I love it. I think it's great. The point of sale Breeze Wallet they got for merchants is awesome because and this is where like the custodial. So I'm not a fan of custodial Bitcoin at all. I think everyone should self-custody their Bitcoin. But when it comes, but when it comes to Lightning, I think custodial is an acceptable risk depending on how much money you got in there. If you got a couple of $100, then the headache it takes out of running your own node, channel management, all of that. And I'm not saying people shouldn't run their own nodes. If you're running a Bitcoin node for sure, and a Lightning node is technical, so it's not for everyone, But that being said, the custodial aspect of Lightning wallets makes the user experience a lot easier. And a few years down the line,
Breeze is non-custodial, right?
But their merchant POS one is custodial.
Oh, that one.
So
is,
like
okay.
there's a little section in there that's custodial because, for example, if I want to accept a Lightning payment into Breeze wallet, that's non-custodial, so I have to have liquidity, inbound liquidity, Whereas, as far as I understand, but if I have the merchant version using the POS and I generate an invoice, it gets sent to me. So obviously they're doing something with the liquidity in the back end.
They use a cool technique called turbo channels, which is basically a inbound liquidity channel that can get created to you on the fly. And then it's still non-custodial because they don't store the keys protecting your coins, but there's some level of trust to establish that turbo channel so quickly because it doesn't.
Yes.
You don't wait until it confirms on the blockchain.
Yeah. And I mean, this is where these acceptable risks and trade-offs come in, like you'd be, as a merchant, if you've just done a payment of 500 Rand for something and someone double spends you're going to be pretty pissed, but generally, I mean, these things will iron themselves out. But what I really like about Breeze is their podcasting 2.0 integration that they've got in the app, which is for content creators, man, this is the future. You don't have to be slave to ads. I mean, we run ads on other podcasts, so I'm kind of being a hypocrite here. But like, you can generate your own content and have stats streamed directly to you for your content that you create, which is, I think, a phenomenal innovation. Like, and you incorporate that into a general Bitcoin wallet. You're killing two birds with one stone. So that's very cool. Moon Wallet, also, I love what they've done. Just the way that they do your security for your self-custody in the beginning is very cool to see that, like, out of the box thinking. And Blue Wallet, I dig Blue Wallet. We recommend Blue Wallet to all of our clients because it's so easy. Obviously, the Lightning section is custodial, but I mean, just think about like 3-4 years ago, how the wallet like space has changed and how much better they are. And the wallets we were all using back then, not around anymore.
Yeah, exactly. There's been significant advancements in not only the sort of plumbing, but also the like user-facing technology. That makes me happy because we're starting to get to that point that I thought we would get to much sooner, which was peer-to-peer payments finally.
Well, we could have all had peer-to-peer payments if we went the big block route, but Bitcoin SV just got 51% attacked last week and reorged. So I mean, it's the price you pay for decentralization, right? It's like things move slow. Yeah,
so it's like, again, the idea of evolution. What's that fitness function that you're trying to optimize for? Is it fast payments or is it decentralization?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, is it pretty feathers or is it big teeth? Like everything's a trade-off. There's a trade-off to everything, and people make these trade-offs without appreciating the risks they're taking on. And I mean, it's interesting. So the company I work for, we had a seminar last week, and we had a guy there with us who runs a company that runs on top of Bitcoin SV for remittances. The tech stack they built is brilliant. What they've done is great, but they're built on top of Bitcoin SV, and now their business is, facing some serious challenges because Bitcoin SV just got reorged, and you're going to be sending your money remittances on that network. You might think twice before
it's one of those weird things. Like, it's almost on the level of MTI. I don't understand why people just buy into this stuff. It's like you basically have to believe Satoshi was a clairvoyant prophet that was
Jesus,
perfect in all ways. Basically, if Satoshi was Jesus, then BSV is the correct coin, and the rest of us are mistaken.
Yeah.
But probably he wasn't. Probably he was just another person or group of people.
Have you thought about the fact that what if Craig Wright is indeed Satoshi and he is just so wrong, actually? Like, what he initially thought, he was 80%, he was 90% right. And then that 10% that he was wrong, it's just fucked him. Like that's an interesting parallel universe.
If he was Satoshi, he would be able to spend his coins. He'd be able to sign the message. It's very simple.
It's that simple. And here we are, years down the line, and some people still believe Craig Wright's Satoshi.
Yeah, or that we should believe in the infallible wisdom of Satoshi from 2009.
Right. Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
you can't foresee all these developments ahead of time. You have to adjust course as you go along.
And that's the beauty of a decentralized peer-to-peer network. Like as soon as Satoshi let that free into the wild, that was it. Like his control over what it was or is now was done. Like it's gone. Like you let it go into the wild and it becomes its own.
He very clearly
monster.
gave it away. He very clearly gave it away like that.
And he knew
anybody
exactly.
that pretends to claim back and claim that they've released it and they're the sole custodian of the technology, they are clearly not Satoshi.
Yeah. I mean, I think people can gain a lot from reading, the Bitcoin Talk forums and the early writings of Satoshi, and then, the developers after the fact, because it's not as if there were a lot of developers that had a vision for Bitcoin. I mean, if you look at Gavin Andreessen and Mike Hearn, they were big blockers, like these guys were Bitcoin SV acolytes, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean,
Satoshi was a big blocker. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, would Satoshi have been in that? Would he have gone to the hard fork on Bitcoin Cash? Like who knows? But the fact that he left Bitcoin means it doesn't matter, which is thank God for that. Or thanks Satoshi for that, really.
Because there's some deep wisdom in that decision.
Oh yeah, big time. Also, because just think of the target he would have on his back from the feds if people knew who he was.
Exactly, like Rick.
I mean, like Vitalik, right? Like Vitalik, he's the face and brains of Ethereum. If something were to happen, or if Ethereum got powerful enough to challenge central banks, if Ethereum was Bitcoin, the feds would be all over Vitalik. They would have co-opted him by now. He would have had pressure applied, and Lord knows he probably has had pressure applied already.
I don't want to be that guy. I can tell you that much.
No one wants that. No one wants that. While we're on that topic, what are your thoughts on Ethereum?
I mean, what a fantastic grand vision, first of all, and one of the first let's call it like a world computer project. But that doesn't solve my problem of peer-to-peer payments that well. Mostly because I don't know if you've ever tried to sync an Ethereum node, but it's very fucking far from peer-to-peer at this point.
I have not tried. No, syncing my Bitcoin node is enough of an issue.
But I mean, like it's one of those fantastic, vast experiments. Just like Bitcoin is also still just an experiment. So, and if their proof of stake migration can go well and they can significantly improve the throughput of the network and everything, I mean, I hope it succeeds. You can call me a Bitcoin maxi, but I also don't hate other significant projects and technologies.
Yeah, you don't have to be just because you love something doesn't mean you have to be a hater of something else. Like, I wish those projects well as well. I just don't care about them because it's not, like you say, it's not solving the problem I need solved.
Yeah, I've never looked at writing an Ethereum contract. I haven't spent much time actually working on Ethereum itself. Whereas with Bitcoin, I've went into the guts of it and figured out how to update signing functions so you can. Yeah, it's like Bitcoin is definitely my main focus.
And tell me, what do you think about the idea of Bitcoin's blockchain being a source of truth for things we need to be truthful in the future? So, for example, if hashing, like you can hash a message into the blockchain, right? And it might not be that you hash the entire message into it. It might be that you put an encryption in the hash in there that links to, you hash a link to a, not necessarily a website, but to another document stored somewhere. That could be a news article, for example, because the reason why I bring this up is we're seeing things being memory holed in the common narrative right now, where the media is being scrubbed. Let's take extreme example, but the CDC's website they're changing, or the WHO's website are changing the definition of herd immunity, for example. This is a hot topic. They change that definition. So having something like that hashed onto the Bitcoin blockchain, where it can't be undone, can't be changed, because you need to exert a huge amount of electricity to reorg the chain. Do you think there's any utility there?
Well, I guess there's no risk of double spending. So do you really need to spend that much electricity to avoid a reorg? You could. I don't know if it's really necessary, and if you could just use something like IPFS or one of these sort of file system type of projects. You can use Bitcoin for that. That would be bulletproof. If you put the hash on the blockchain, it's there forever.
Yeah.
The question is just, is it really necessary to use all of that vast power to do that, or is there maybe an easier, cheaper way of doing it?
It would have to be something really important that to put on there, like the 10 Commandments. If you wanted to prove the 10 Commandments really happened, and like it was really pure, hash it on the chain, and then like it's there, which would be interesting. But it just goes back, I suppose, to the cost of block size or block space. Like there's a premium on block space, and like depends how important your message is that you need to hash. Like Satoshi's initial.
Yeah, I mean, what's beautiful about it is that nothing prevents a parent from putting the birth of their child in the blockchain. It's there forever. They can do that.
Yeah.
So I'm not here to dictate what you may and may not use it for.
Yeah. That's an interesting one, actually, because I mean, you would need to link that to the biometrics of the child or the person to prove that definitively is that person. Just put someone's name on the blockchain. Like, how would you prove that is that person? But I'm sure some people far cleverer than me can figure that out. But this is where the altcoin thing comes in, right? Because all this shit has been tried on altcoins before. Like, we talk about it. There's a project out there that has done this stuff, I'm sure. Like, and this kind of tech can be built in. It doesn't have to be built in the base layer either. It could be done on the layer 2 and layer 3, etc., where block space isn't at such a premium. But then, you start getting into some really interesting stuff. But the base layer has got to be stable first. And to come back to the BSV example of this guy I know who built his remittance company on top of BSV, if you build on shaky foundations and you build a whole business on top of it and those foundations aren't solid, you screw yourself over in the long term. And
I mean, the BSV network is probably going to be around for a long time, whether we like it or not. So might not be very stable, but it'll be there.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen quite a few coins die already, right? Where people have just stopped mining them. And I mean, like you say, like BSV will be around, but eventually it's a winner take all thing where it'll probably go to zero and be reorged so many times that then hash power will just leave. But I mean, it'll probably be around for a while still. But the point is, like, if you want to build a contract, for example, if you want to have a smart contract on a property, or my mortgage or my bond or my house, I want that to be there for 20 years minimum. I'm not going to build it on something that will BSV still be around in 20 years? Doubtful. I mean, it's up for debate. Will Bitcoin be around in 20 years?
There'll probably be one node in 20 years.
Craig writes, but running his node from prison.
Do you really want to put physical property on the blockchain if there's no way for you to really use the blockchain to enforce your ownership of it?
No, that was a poor example. But what I'm getting at here. Like, right. If you want to build a smart contract, for example, on top of a blockchain, the point I'm getting at is that you want to build it on the most stable foundation possible, because Bitcoin is digital enforcement of property rights, or not enforcement, it's digital representation of property rights. So how does that expand to other avenues? And this is where the smart contracting thesis comes from, I suppose. But if you build it on top of Ethereum, for example, and Ethereum is not Ethereum anymore in 10 years' time, because they're going down the proof of stake hole, and then Lord knows what happens after that, what happens to your property rights?
Well, NFTs, but I don't want to talk about NFTs.
I don't know much about NFTs. Yeah, it's not my wheelhouse either, to be honest. So yeah. Carel, last topic before we wrap up: regulation in Bitcoin. I know this is
Yeah, this
something
is
that
probably
you.
supposed to be the main topic of the discussion, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, just all you do is just delete everything before this,
No.
and then we can just.
No. The regulations are boring stuff. But what's your take on it? Current regulation, future regulation. What do you think it should be?
Well, I mean, there's various aspects of regulation. So we talked about the scams and MTIs and things like this, and then there's regulation that determines rules around things like giving financial advice related to cryptocurrencies, and holding people's funds, custodianship of funds, and all of these things. That's one type of regulation. Then there's like anti-money laundering and KYC regulation. And then probably the things that I'm more interested in is taxation and exchange control regulations.
Yeah.
So, and like you said earlier, regulation cuts both ways. So there's definitely regulation that's needed in the industry, for sure. We need to kill the MTIs. But there's also some regulation where if it just gets pushed through without enough thought, without enough input from the, let's call it the hackers in the industry or the entrepreneurs or the innovators, it will damage South Africa's potential. And like you've said, we've got Lunos and Valors and altcoin traders and all these, not even just exchanges, all these other innovative products that's emerged from South Africa. We have the brains. Question is whether the regulators are going to push that brain power away or embrace it.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of regulation itself, I don't know if there's any specific regulation you want to talk about.
No, I mean it's up to you. You lead on this. I mean, you're the one who's a bit more plugged in. I mean, I am kind of plugged into it, I suppose, but it's something I don't really enjoy.
So probably the most insane regulation that we have right now is exchange controls.
Yeah.
And it's like a vestige from when South Africa first became a republic. It was the same exchange control regulations that was mentioned in the media a month or 2 months ago, that says you can't send Bitcoin that you bought on a local exchange to an overseas wallet.
Yeah.
That regulation comes from the days when we first established the rand. Right? It's so old that the amounts that the specific clauses in there where they say, guess what? You're not allowed to export more than 20 rands worth of goods from the Republic. Guess what? You're not allowed to wear clothes worth more than 600 rand if you step on an airplane that leaves the country.
So everyone is a criminal who's left South Africa on a plane in the last 20 years.
I mean, technically, yes. Obviously, they'll say, well, that's an old rule, and that 600 rand should probably be 100,000 rand today or whatever. But okay, if we can say that rule is old and antiquated, why can't we revisit the rule that says you can't take capital out without permission from the Treasury? And even if they maintain that you need to have express permission from Treasury to send capital like crypto assets out, then the onus is on them to provide the reporting facilities for that. They can't just say, okay, so you need to report it to us, but we don't have any way for you to report it, therefore you can't do it. Right? That's just tyrannical. So that's something that certainly needs to be revisited. And I think there's some noise about it. There was some in early 2020 about these regulations maybe being updated in the near future, and then COVID happened, and I think they lost some momentum. But something that they did clarify, which I think is new information. I mean, other people are welcome to disagree with me, is that they clarified the idea that a Bitcoin bought on Luno or Valor altcoin trader is a Bitcoin that resides within the borders of South Africa.
I wonder who the clever person was who wrote that. Yeah.
It could have been worse. They could have said any Bitcoin that exists outside the borders of South Africa.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, true.
And if they took that position from the start, then acquiring Bitcoin is going to be tricky. Then you'd be limited in the amount you could purchase, and you'd be limited in a much worse way. So they had to take a stance on it. And again, like, it's not new rules they made up that you can't send Bitcoin overseas. It's a crime now. It's just that's what's in the rules. It doesn't matter that it's 60 years old. That's the rules.
Yeah.
So the stance that they took, and the stance that they took is probably the lesser of two evils, in my view.
Yeah, true. No, true. I agree.
But it's still insane. It's still totally disconnected from reality.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, this is where having interested parties going and lobbying the regulator to have these rules changed is, the way that society is supposed to work. The problem we're faced with, as you are very well aware, is that going to lobby the regulator is like banging your head against a brick wall.
Yeah, well, so I've been fortunate enough to talk to some of them, and I think the regulators are open to lobbying. In fact, they're probably surprised that there's not a lobbyist group already in South Africa. They expect it to emerge, and then they will engage with that group. So that is probably the best thing that we as a cryptocurrency community can do, is support something like that. But the question is, who drives it, right?
Yeah.
And so I know Altcoin Trader just recently launched the Crypto Assets Association, something. I still need to go read the paper on that. So, but I mean, the regulators are not stupid. They've got very smart people that's very much clued up on everything crypto, and they want somebody to engage with. It's just nobody's there for them to talk to.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, Richard reached out to me the other day, and I've got a message from him about the group, and it's it's probably something we should do, is engage, but simultaneously we're building. We're busy building a product and going and spending. I've worked in this realm before. Back in a previous life, I used to develop organic fertilizers for a biotech firm. And we used to have to go and submit to the government our products, and you have to submit all these things to the regulator, and you have to deal with the regulator because they issue the licenses for what fertilizer you can produce. And it is a full-time job dealing with the regulator. There's just so much paperwork, and that's a very well entrenched, established, industry. So there's obviously a large amount of regulations that acts governing what a fertilizer can be. So it's much more complicated than what this would be. But it's a very time-consuming job. So you kind of need to have scale where you can afford to pay someone to go and lobby for you. That's the nature of the beast. And that's exactly why big business always ends up being the one who lobbies, big government.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can sit here and complain about it and be like, I'm a small entrepreneur in the Bitcoin space, but, simultaneously I should be out there doing it myself and getting involved. But, you've only got so many hours in a day. Unfortunately, it's the nature of it.
Yeah, or if there's just somebody that's trustworthy that we can pool funds, I'm sure they'll collect a significant amount of support. But to your point that the only way to change regulation is via lobbying, that's not entirely true.
Yeah. True.
You could also take it to court, and you can make a case in court, and the courts can decide. There was a case in 2012 where a company, I think they wanted to sell a portion of, or maybe all of their stock to an international entity. And the Reserve Bank said, no, your IP needs to stay in South Africa because it's subject to capital controls.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that Shuttleworth had to deal with, I think.
Yeah.
And the company won. Yeah.
No, just on that point, which is the most insane thing that most people don't know. Intellectual property is treated as capital that you can't export. It's subject to exchange controls, which I had no idea until I started a company.
the most insane part about that is that this was challenged in court. The company challenging the Reserve Bank won, and the court said, okay, it's not subject to capital controls. And then what did the Reserve Bank do? They didn't say, oh, well, okay, the court's clarified this. I think in the very next year, they amended the 60-year-old regulation, and they included a clause that said, no, intellectual property is considered capital. Yeah, this was in 2012. So that to me is really sad. We can talk about why restricting IP to South Africa is bad, but what really upsets me is that now people are saying, okay, what should we do? Sending local crypto abroad is a crime. What should we do? And the regulators are saying, no, you should send your rands to an international exchange and buy it there. Like, how sad is that? They're literally saying, like, fuck the local innovators, fuck the local business builders, right? We're going to entrench legacy monopolies and rather just send your money overseas to foreign exchanges and they'll make the trade fees, whatever.
And
that
screw,
to me is
the
worst part of it all.
Screw Luno, Valor, and Altcoin Trader, who combined have paid billions in rands in corporate taxes. Like, screw them.
They employ, like, I don't know, hundreds of people.
Yeah. And they employ the smartest people. They keep the brains in the country. Those guys would have gone to Kraken. They'd be working abroad right now. Like, it's insane. Absolutely insane.
That's why it's insane to me.
Yeah. Wild. Well, yeah. On that note, regulators. Yeah. What you gonna do? So
hopefully somebody can have a good solid chat with them and sort it out.
Yeah. I mean, we say that, we sit here complaining like we should be the ones doing it, to be honest. And I know you've deeper into this than I am. It's just, I just fucking hate the admin of it, like I'm not a bureaucratic person. There's some better people than me to be involved in the bureaucracy of it.
No, you're right. I did participate in a project which is actually called Crypto Assets Association, unrelated to Altcoin Trader, and the goal was to give responses to these regulatory proposals. But recently, I'm also of the same mind that, you know what, I just want to sit and write code and build the infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, it's respectable to do that, like focus on what you're good at. And so it's your life, spend your time where you want to spend your time. But simultaneously, people are going to hate on us after hearing this, be like, you guys just complaining. Why aren't you doing anything about it? Sorry, guys, we'll be better. But yeah, it's a worry. Like, we've got to, I suppose, come together and find someone who's very keenly interested in this and fund them to go and fight the good fight for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, Carel, on that note, I think we're going to leave it there. Tell me, where can anyone find your work if they want to read more about your work or follow you?
So, I mean, if they want to follow me, my handle is in I wonder if they'll see this at Carel van Wyk with the V. But as for the projects that I'm working on, you can go to cryptoconvert.co.za. If you go there now, you're going to see a page that says just another WordPress site. So if you go there tonight, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I can update that with the proof of concept that I've been working on to convert sats into watts.
Don't you want to put a mailing list up there for us so we can join and stay up to date? Am I asking too much?
That's a great idea. No, that's a great idea. It's one of those things where you've got limited time. What are you going to spend it on?
Yeah, true.
So, that's a great idea. Thanks. I'll add a mailing list on the.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd love to support that. That sounds like a great project. Yeah, Carel, thank you so much for your time. This has been phenomenal. I love getting to talk to guys that get their hands so-called dirty, on the dev side of it, because I'm lacking on that side. So it's cool to get the technical views on it. And thank you for the work you do. And I'm sure we're going to see some very cool products coming out in the near future. And very keen to follow what you do. Thank you very much.
Thanks, man.
We'll chat soon.
All right.
Cool. Have a good one, Cheers, man. Bye.
Bye-bye.